Hi, welcome to Bible Basics. I'm glad you could join me again. Thank you for those who are subscribing and sharing. And I think it's important to share because Don Preston is getting a lot of views and a lot of press coverage, we should say. And I'm starting to see more and more influence of full preterism and finding it among quote unquote doctors of theology and things. And I got to deal with these. I can't sit there and deal with everything that Don produces, of course, because he's produced so many things. So I'm just taking little things here and there and trying to take a bite out of things here and there is all I'm going to be attempting to do. Now, in his last video, before the holidays, he brought up two specific books that he was talking about. A great new book on Revelation from Robert Pike, and then the other one was from let me pull it. I'm pulling up screens here on my computer, and that way I can look at the titles and make sure I get this correct. The second one, There is a Better Way, the Biblical Transition from the Old Covenant to the New Covenant by Dr. Jimmy Henry. Now with me, I've got, which is real nice, I've got Kindle Unlimited, which I pay about $10 for, and a lot of these books will come up there. Not that I can download them and buy them, but I'm able to read them for free and be able to look at it and review and download them, and then I can save notes. And so that's what I've been doing for the last couple of days. Is I've gone over a couple of these books. Eyewitnesses of His Majesty by Jimmy Henry as the first one. A Biblical View of the Return of Jesus Christ. And There's a Better Way, the Biblical Transition from the Old Covenant to the New, by Jimmy Henry also. Now, he's promoting these two guys as teaching biblical theology, and they are considered full preterists. But the first one here I want to deal with, and what I did was, of course, pulled out some notes, and I'm going to deal with some of these things that he says. So, not trying to rush things, but I don't want to be here forever looking at this and keep you up. And the point would be made is Don Preston is promoting these guys. And so how many mistakes do you need to make to prove that your system is inconsistent? How many mistakes do you have to make in order to show that your system and how you've put things is not consistent and way off base? So I'm going to go over some of these highlights that I pulled out and show you where we have a problem. And some of the things in the arguments that I'm making in my current series of dealing with what was fulfilled and what was not. So in this first one here, location 295, it says, He came to a man as a man so that he might fulfill all the preceptive demands of the law and pay the penalty demands of the law. Okay, the penal demands of the law. I brought this up, and I'm bringing this up, and I've talked about when we talk about the terms of the covenant, the penal demands of the law is that everybody should die. So it was Christ who says, the writer of Hebrews says that Jesus Christ died for the penal demands of the law. I want to make that note. In the next quote, in 3:3-4, they would no longer be required to offer animal sacrifices and live under the oppression of the law. Jesus had secured life and liberty for all that believe. He is unchanging, and since his completed work on the cross, things have changed. The old order is finished, and now believers live free from the law of sin and death. Now, if that was true, then Paul would have said, it is death that works within my members, but my mind I serve the law of God, but with my body the law of sin and death. So the first thing to note here is these guys might be called doctors or whatever. I don't think Jimmy Henry is. But they don't understand those distinctions. They are not theologically trained. So if I say the old order is finished and now believers live free from the law of sin and death, if the old order is gone and finished with, then it no longer exists. I want to make that very clear. So it is not just believers that live free from the law of sin and death. We have to define what that law was, and it was the one that's working within the members of your body, not with your mind. So if you are a believer, you can be sure that his promise is yours. For he said, let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as you have. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, and I will not fear what men shall do to me. Now he's quoting Hebrews 13:5-6 in this book. It's about going through Hebrews. Now here's what he says. He spoke to his first century disciples and assure you that they are for you too. He said, these things I have spoken unto you, that in me you might have peace in the world, and that you shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Audience relevance here, baby. He's saying this was also for us. So he just destroys your interpretation of what audience relevance is. He's applying that verse in Hebrews 13:5 and says it applies to us too. So I wanted to make that point. Now, next one here, 486. He also paid the debt demanded by a broken law. That is death. Okay, got to make this real clear. He also paid the debt demanded by a broken law. By you breaking the law, that is physical deaths. You got to make sure that's clear. It is not spiritual death that you endure by breaking the law. You are born into spiritual death, but by breaking the law, you are the penal death. Get that? Penal death is the subject of what happens to you for breaking the physical law. So it's physical death. So come to 541. Under the old covenant, the house of which Moses presided, God dwelt behind the veil in the tabernacle, later behind the veil in the temple. But when Jesus died, the veil of the temple was rent in two, showing that men now have access to God without the need of an earthly priest. No longer do men have to bring an animal sacrifice to the priest to atone for sin. For Jesus, the great high priest, has offered himself as the once-for-all sacrifice for the sins of his people. Okay, people, theologically, this is why he's not trained. This is why it doesn't make any sense. If the veil of the temple was rent in two, what does that demonstrate? That there is no longer a veil between people and God. People can now enter the Holy of Holies because the righteous requirements of the law have been fulfilled. The penal death that was done by Christ means that temple is torn in view. God is no longer separated because the one sacrifice has been made. For hundreds of years, men lived under the law, but none were able to keep it. Correct? So that means that they weren't able to keep it. They were to die by the terms of the law. But when Jesus came, he kept the law and perfected righteousness and imputes his perfect righteousness to all that come to him by faith. Where all were under condemnation, judgment, now all who receive by faith are declared justified in God's sight. What does that mean? He kept the law perfectly. He made the way straight for us through the veil. All that was performed under the old covenant was but a type or a shadow of that which Jesus accomplished when he came into the world. This is important to remember. Later on I'll mention more. But if he kept all the types and the shadows, then it was all fulfilled with Christ, correct? Now, man can come for himself to the throne of grace through Jesus, the great high priest. In fact, the writer says, he takes away the first that he may establish the second, by that which we were all sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once and for all. Hebrews 10:3-10. Jesus was able to offer the one perfect sacrifice, for he had fulfilled all the preceptive demands of the law by his sinless life, as the writer said. You get the power of that. He takes away the first, that he may establish the second. What are we talking about? The covenant. He took away the first covenant that he might establish the second. What is that saying? There are no two covenants existing at the same time, people. He took away the first in order that there might be the second may come in. So, are you catching the power of this? And vanish it did. When Jesus entered the heavens itself to appear in the presence of God for us, he obtained by his own precious blood eternal redemption for us. Jesus had come as promised and had fulfilled all the types of the shadows of the covenant. And now the way into God's presence has been completed by the sacrifice of Jesus, made when he gave himself as a lamb without spot and blemish on the cross. Okay, so if Jesus died and entered the most holy place which is in heaven, he did away with the first to establish the second. The first, the way in, is now made accessible. Why does he have to come out? He doesn't. Because if heaven is the place where people die and go to, that way has been opened up by the veil of his flesh. We now can come through that veil and enter into heaven. We do not have to wait for him to come out. Do you catch the power of that? You don't have to come out. He does not have to come out to show us that the way is open. That is the pattern of the Old Testament. He came out and showed that the sacrifice was accepted. How do we know under the terms of the New that it was accepted? Because he sat down at the right hand of the Father. Now those who die can enter into heaven, the most holy place, because his blood, the sacrifice of his blood, made the way for that to happen. How is that physically symbolized? The temple tore into the veil. He's saying it himself, but he doesn't even realize what he's saying. As long as the temple was standing and the Levitical priests were still offering animal sacrifice, the full revelation of the perfect work of Christ would not be grasped. Why? I ask, why would it not be grasped? Because it is what? Spiritually understood, and it was spiritually born. So what is it that made it alive in people's eyes? And what was it that made Jewish Christians, Jews that became Christian, what was it? They came to faith in who? Jesus, who what? Died and was resurrected. Do you not grasp that? That's how it wasn't through that. When they came to understand it was Christ's sacrifice, it was taken care of. A new thought. So when he said, at heaven, in that passage, heaven and earth shall pass away, he was using language of cosmic imagery. Just as we use so often in the Old Testament, when God addressed the leaders in Israel and those under them, he used this type of language. Notice how it was used in the book of Isaiah when addressing the people of Judah and Jerusalem. Now we're going back to that passage. Of course, heaven and earth were passing away. And as I explained in the other videos and in the paper that I've put out here, that heaven and earth he was talking about literally. And the verse, of course, is, this will be coming out soon, it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for any of God's laws, terms, and conditions that were written in the first covenant just to be passed away. They have to be fulfilled. All right, getting back on the topic again, because he brings this up again. He says, for centuries the early high priest had gone behind the second veil into the Holy of Holies once a year, and there offered the blood of an animal to roll the sins of the people forward by another year. And this was an impressive ritual. The high priest would put on the elaborate things, and he goes on. But when Jesus died on the cross, he did not go behind the veil of the earthly temple, but into heaven itself, having obtained eternal redemption for us. So just as the high priest had to reappear to assure the people that God had received the offering, the writer of the Hebrews said, so Christ was offered to bear the sins of many, and unto them that look for him shall he appear the second time without sin unto salvation. If Jesus did not appear to the generation that the typology of the sacrifice is broken, and we are still under the law, and salvation has not yet been revealed. And that's the complete lie based on Hebrews 9:28. If he offered himself into heaven, he does not have to appear the second time to follow the typology of the sacrifice of the old system. He broke it when he died. It is no longer typical of the Old Testament. He once made the sacrifice once for all, thus ending the old covenant, ending it. It passed away. The typology was broken with Christ, who entered in by the blood of his own sacrifice. Theologically, do you understand that? Then there was no reason for him to have to enter out. So why are we talking about his second coming out? For that salvation. People, that salvation is for the body, the redemption of the body, the change. When he comes, this lowly body that is made of, the flesh and blood, the lowly body of the whole carnal nature of this flesh-blown body is changed. It has become immortal and imperishable. God changes it. There's another quote that'll come up later. I'll show you. Catch this one here. This signified now that the way of the presence of God was open to all that would come to him through the blood of his Son. So, this signified now that the way into the presence of God was open. So, if he's saying the presence of God was now open, that means, where is the presence of God in heaven? That means that we can come through him through the blood of the Lamb. Therefore, we did not have to wait for him to come out. Do you see this as a contradiction of what he is saying? Yeah, here's the next quote. You got to listen to this. The fear of physical death no longer haunts us, for we know that Jesus died for us. He died for our sins and satisfied the charges laid against us. At the moment of physical death, we will be in the presence of the Lord. Well, why isn't that true for them too? Just as death came by disobedience of Adam, life came through obedience of Jesus Christ. They get to live. They get to come into his presence. Wow. There's no reason why there is a veil between them and that they have to wait. Once again, the writer demands this, that the sacrifices of the Old Covenant were insufficient. So Jesus came and fulfilled the law and perfected righteousness by dying on the cross. Has now provided a once and all sacrifice for which the Father is totally satisfied. Get that? Satisfied. Never again would sacrifices be required for his own blood. He entered into the holy place, having obtained eternal redemption for us. When Jesus died, he satisfied all the demands laid against us and conquered all our enemies. So why are we separated? Why was Paul separated? He died before 70. Why was he separated from God? Why is it he couldn't enter the most holy place if Christ died and that blood was applied? See, inconsistency. When Jesus arose from the dead, he defeated death. That is separation from God, and released the souls of all believers from Abel to the thief on the cross, from the place called Hades, the waiting place for people of faith, and the redemption price was paid. Okay, where would they go if they were released? He released them all. Doesn't it say that in Galatians 4 that he ascended and he led the captives captives? Here he is agreeing with that, but then yet they'll turn around and say nobody can go into heaven until 70 AD. That's a contradiction. Unlike the earthly priests, he says again, unlike the earthly priests that had to go behind the veil of the earthly temple with a blood offering to atone for the sins of the people once every year, Jesus, when he died, went into the heaven itself, the true holy place, by his blood, and obtained eternal redemption for us. Jesus fulfilled all that was written about him and has done for us all what we could not do for ourselves. The Lord's crucifixion in 30 AD and his glorious return in judgment in Israel at 70, the two covenants were coexisting. But when Jesus returned, he brought the old covenant age to an end, and we are now privileged to live in the new covenant age. Don't you see that as a contradiction? Total contradiction. Why? Why would the two of them coexist? When Jesus himself, the writers of Hebrews said, he did away with the first in order that he can establish the second. People, that's the bottom line. Anything else contradicts it. All these arguments that they bring up, these contradictory arguments, the way has been opened for us to the Holy of Holies, but oh no, they couldn't enter in until he came out. Those are contradictions. I hope you see that. I hope you listen to that and just kind of grasp that. It's been 18 minutes. I will end here. I'll let you deal with that. Think about it. You can hear it over again. If you got questions, go ahead and do it.